The winter of 1873 was a thief. First, it stole Elias Vance's husband. Then it demanded the last piece of him, the cherrywood violin. She fed the instrument to the flames, a sacrifice made in desperation, a sound more agonizing than any scream. But as the fire roared to life, she heard a sound far worse than the splitting wood, a footstep outside her lonely cabin. Who walks in a blizzard that deep, and what price would salvation truly demand? The vow of iron and wood. The winter of 1873 clawed at the Colorado Territory like a beast of ancient myth. The brutal blizzard had passed, leaving behind a silence so absolute it pressed against the eardrums, where the air itself felt too brittle to hold warmth. Inside the small timber-framed cabin, the battle against the cold was a losing war waged with dwindling resources. Elias Vance moved like a ghost within the 12 by 12-foot space, her shadow thin and elongated by the meager light. It had been 3 weeks since the fever, swift and brutal, had claimed Silas, her husband. He was gone, buried in a shallow, frozen grave behind the woodshed, a place marked now only by the vague, snow-covered mound where the snowdrift had settled deepest. Silas, a man whose hands knew the heft of an axe better than a ledger, had built this cabin with the desperate hope of an Easterner chasing the myth of prosperity. Now the myth was shattered, leaving Alara alone with 2 infants, Leo and Iris, in a land that cared nothing for human dreams. Her existence was reduced to a primal struggle. Keep the fire breathing and keep the babies breathing. The last of the proper firewood had been fed to the hearth hours ago. The small, ragged pile remaining consisted of pine needles, a handful of damp kindling, and desperation. Alara's fingers, stiff with cold despite being near the meager warmth, trembled as she checked the infants. Leo and Iris slept in the makeshift cradle, a sturdy box Silas had built, lined now with every piece of thick cloth and rabbit fur Alara owned. They were miraculously healthy, small miracles of resilience in a hostile world, yet their survival rested entirely on the fragile barrier of heat she maintained. Her gaze drifted to the corner where the violin rested. It was Silas's only luxury, a gift from his mother, carried painstakingly 1,000 miles west from Pennsylvania. Its cherrywood body was scarred from the journey, but it was a perfect, hollow curve that smelled faintly of polish and music. In the relentless pragmatism of the frontier, it was utterly useless. In the landscape of her broken heart, it was the last tangible piece of the gentle man she had loved. She picked it up, the instrument's cool wood chilling her hands further. Survival, however, is a blunt instrument. It allows for no sentiment, only brutal calculus. The heat of memory, no matter how profound, would not keep Leo and Iris alive. Only the immediate roaring heat of fire would. With a wrenching silent sob that shook her thin frame, a sound swallowed entirely by the deep snow outside, Alara took a small hand axe and brought the blade down. The sound was not music. It was a shriek of splitting wood, a cry of utter defeat that echoed loudly in the small space. She hacked the cherry wood into splinters and shards, pieces of fretboard, tuning pegs, and the curved, resonant body scattered on the cold floor. It was a macabre harvest. She fed the precious fragments to the dying embers, and soon a small, aggressive flame licked up, smelling sweetly of burnt polish and clean wood. The guilt was immediate and suffocating, a physical weight heavier than the cold. She had murdered the last gentle thing her husband had left behind, trading art for a few hours of life. Alara settled back, pulling the rifle to her side as the warmth began to prickle her chilled skin. She was exhausted, unable to sleep more than an hour at a stretch since the burial. The nearest settlement, Willow Creek, was 15 miles of impassable snow away. Help from the east was weeks, perhaps months away. She had done the unspeakable, but it had bought them time measured only in hours, not days. It was in this low, desperate moment, around the sound of the crackling, sacrilegious fire, that she heard the sound. A crunch. Not the shifting of snow, but the deliberate, heavy step of a human outside the cabin door. Her heart seized, a frantic bird beating against her ribs. She snatched up Silas's old rifle, the cold steel a sudden comfort against her cheek. This land dealt in cruelties, and a visitor could mean salvation or a new kind of terror. "Who's there?" Her voice was a cracked whisper, unused for days. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. A deep, measured voice, carrying a slight, careful accent that was neither Southern drawl nor Eastern clip, responded. "I am Jax Rourke. I saw your smoke. It is too faint for this cold. I mean no harm. Do you require assistance?" Elara hesitated, peering through a thin scrape she managed to make on the frost-covered window. She saw a tall, powerful man, clad in thick buckskins and furs, his breath pluming white. His face was weathered, a blend of sharp, high cheekbones and dark, penetrating eyes. He wore a heavy wool hat, and a hunting bow was slung across his back. He was a man of the frontier, clearly a half-blood, part white, part something else. In her narrow experience, he was a man to be feared, a man of the other world. "I have 2 infants," she called out, gripping the rifle until her knuckles were white. "I am armed, and I will use this." "I see the need, and I respect your caution," Jax replied softly. "I am distant tracker to my people, the Comanche. I was caught by the storm. I have venison, and I see your fire is dying. We must rebuild it, or you will freeze by morning." The word freeze was the weapon he used. Elara's hand shook. The life of her children depended on this. "Fire." She lowered the rifle just enough to fumble with the frozen latch. When the door swung open, the blast of frigid air hit her like a physical punch. Jax Rourke stepped in, his dark eyes instantly taking in the small, starving space. He saw the empty food stores, the pathetic piles of kindling, and the scattered, splintered pieces of cherry wood near the hearth. He looked from the cradle to Elara's gaunt face, then back to the fireplace. He didn't need to be told the story of the violin. "We begin now," he said, his voice calm, cutting through her panic. "First the wood, then the food." He set down his pack and, without another word, took the hand axe. "Do you have more substantial timber outside?" "Behind the shed," Elara managed, leaning against the doorframe. "Silas. He cut some pine before the first snows." Jax nodded. He scooped up the axe, his movement economical, and vanished into the white silence. Moments later, the rhythmic thwack of the axe against wood echoed from behind the cabin. It was the sound of competence, the first steady rhythm Elara had heard in weeks. When he returned, his arms full of heavy pine logs, he rebuilt the fire with a practiced efficiency that spoke of generations spent fighting the cold. "This is good," he stated once the fire roared. "Not ideal, but it burns well." He then unwrapped his pack, revealing strips of smoked venison. "Eat, Elara Vance. You are close to breaking, and your children depend on your strength." As Elara warmed a strip of meat over the fire, the first real nourishment she'd had in days, Jax knelt by the hearth, clearing away the mess. He picked up one of the violin shards, a piece of the delicate scrollwork, stained with snow and ash, a fragment that still held the memory of its shape. He looked at the wood, then at her, his dark eyes holding no judgment, only a deep, quiet recognition of her sacrifice. "My father," he said, his voice softer, "was a trader. He taught me to see value in all things, white or red, and to honor the necessary pain. This wood did not die in vain." He took out a small, sharp hunting knife and began to work the wood. For nearly half an hour he was silent, meticulously scraping, carving, and polishing the small piece of the scrollwork. He drilled a tiny hole through it, strung it on a thin strip of rawhide from his pack, and presented it to Elara. "This was a sacrifice," he said. "It is part of your sorrow, but also part of your victory. Do not let it be forgotten. Silas would know you fought. Wear this, Elara Vance. It is a vow that your grief will become strength." Elara took the wooden charm. It was warm now from the friction of his working, and it smelled faintly of pine resin and old polish. The vow of wood. It was the first time she had felt anything other than despair since Silas died. The first moment a stranger had honored her pain without diminishing it. "Thank you," she choked out, placing the rawhide over her head. "I don't know how to repay you." "You already have," Jax replied, looking at the twins, who were stirring and making soft sounds. "You survived long enough for me to find you. That is payment enough." He then laid out the brutal truth of their situation. Willow Creek is impossible. I came from the north. The blizzard has piled the drifts high in the passes. You and the infants would not survive the journey on foot. Elara's brief surge of hope died. She looked down at the tiny, fragile infants. Then, what is left? My people, Jack said, his expression serious. The Comanche. We are wintering in a protected valley, a day's journey from here. It is safe, warm, and we have supplies. They value life, especially children. They will take you in until spring, until the snow thaws and safer travel is possible. Elara stared, her eyes wide with shock and a deeper fear. Her entire life, her culture, her parents back east had instilled in her a paralyzing fear of Indians, of the very people he represented. She knew the popular stories of violence, not of rescue. Your tribe? She stammered. I am Comanche on my mother's side, Jax explained patiently. My father was white, a traitor. I moved between both worlds, but I live primarily with my mother's people. I know the tensions, Elara Vance. To many settlers, I am too Indian to trust. To some in my tribe, I am too white. But Chief Iron Hand is a man of wisdom. He will honor my request. He let the silence hang, allowing her to wrestle with the impossible choice. Her world offered only two choices: freeze to death in the wilderness, or place the lives of her children entirely in the hands of the Comanche. Elara looked at her sleeping twins, then at the fire, and finally at the vow of wood around her neck. The terror of the freezing cabin was more immediate, more certain than the terror of the unknown. She had murdered her husband's memory to survive. She could risk her own prejudices to save her children. We will go, she whispered, her voice firming with the finality of the decision. When can we leave? At first light, Jax replied, his face showing a flicker of relief. Sleep now. The journey will be demanding. That night, Elara lay in the warmth provided by Jax's constant vigilance over the fire. She watched him, calm and methodical, adding logs to the hearth. She was grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought this half-breed hunter to her door. She was grateful that her sheer terror had forced her to make a decision based purely on survival, overriding the ingrained hatreds of her culture. Her world was gone. A new, terrifying one was about to begin. They departed at the first hint of gray light. Elara was bundled in multiple layers, her boots awkward over the thick wool socks Coda had advised. Jax had fashioned thick, sturdy snowshoes for her from pine branches and rawhide, showing her patiently how to secure them and urging her to step only in his tracks. Leo and Iris were secured in them. Travois, the small sledge lined thickly with buffalo fur. They looked, as Jax observed with a rare, fleeting smile, like small bear cubs. Jax secured the heavy harness across his chest and shoulders. Walk steadily, Elara Vance. Do not push, but do not stop. If you tire, you must tell me immediately. The journey began, the only sound the rhythmic crunch of snow under their shoes. Jax set a punishing but sustainable pace. Elara, awkward at first on the snowshoes, soon found a rhythm, her muscles protesting the unaccustomed strain. The landscape was beautiful and terrible, an endless expanse of white, the eastern horizon blazing with a cold, clear sun. They traveled steadily through the morning, stopping only briefly at midday beneath a sheltered rock outcropping. Jax efficiently built a tiny fire, melted snow for water, and warmed the remaining venison. Leo and Iris had slept through the entire morning, waking only when Elara needed to feed them. They are strong children, Jax commented, watching Elara burp little Leo. Comanche would say they have powerful spirits. Their father was strong, Elara replied softly, pulling the charm of the wooden scrollwork from under her collar. I hope they know him somehow. They will know him through your stories, Jax assured her. This is how all children learn of ancestors they did not meet in life. They pushed on into the afternoon. Elara's legs burned, but the fear of being left behind fueled her. As the shadows lengthened, the weather began to turn, despite the morning's clarity. Dark clouds gathered quickly in the west, and the wind began to pick up, carrying a cruel edge. The wind is shifting again, Jax announced grimly, studying the sky with a practiced eye. We must move quickly. We still have many miles. He increased the pace, pushing harder through the deepening snow. Elara struggled to keep up, fear overriding the pain in her muscles. They had traveled perhaps another 2 hours when the first dry snowflakes began to fall, the prelude to another storm. Jack scanned their surroundings desperately. "We cannot reach the camp before this hits. We must find shelter now." Just as the light began to fail, they found what they needed: a stand of dense, twisted pines growing alongside a massive, shadowy rock outcropping. "The rocks will block the wind from one side, the pines from the other," Jax explained, directing Alara toward the shelter. He quickly began clearing the snow and building a simple lean-to using thick pine branches. By the time the wind began to howl, they were inside the rough shelter, the twins swaddled warmly between Alara and Jax. Jax built a small fire pit at the opening, positioning it perfectly to draw air and reflect heat inward. The immediate danger was past, but the storm was gathering intensity. The second unusual event, the spiritual connection of the frontier, unfolded. The fire was struggling despite Jax's best efforts. The wind shifted violently again, finding every seam and gap in their temporary shelter. Iris, the little girl, began to cry. Not the usual fussy cry, but a high, distressed, and inconsolable wail that cut through the sound of the wind. Alara tried everything: feeding, rocking, shushing, but the infant refused to be comforted. Jax looked concerned, his face etched with worry as he watched the sky. Suddenly, Iris fell silent. Her dark eyes, wide and focused, stared intently into the solid blackness of the north side of the shelter, the direction the wind was currently hitting hardest. She began to reach out with her tiny, bundled hand, waving it toward the invisible void, not as if wanting comfort, but as if pointing at it. "She sees something," Jax murmured, his hunter's instinct immediately alert. "The Comanche believes some children are born with the sight. We call them the little sky. They see the shape of the land and the coming of the air." "Nonsense," Alara started, the skepticism of her Eastern upbringing fighting the immediate, irrational terror of the situation. "Hush! She is not crying now. She is leading." Jax quickly consulted his mental map of the territory, recalling a small, deeper crevice in the main rock face that should have been too exposed. The direction Iris was pointing was indeed toward the rock, but slightly further along the cliff face. Taking a desperate chance, Jax secured the fire, grabbed the travois, and following the subtle, persistent direction of the infant's outstretched hand, plunged into the growing snowstorm toward the point Iris indicated. 10 frantic minutes later, they stumbled upon it, a massive fissure in the rock face that formed a perfect, shallow cave, miraculously shielded from the punishing northern wind by a jutting overhang. It was warmer, drier, and provided the immediate crucial shelter that the lean-to could not. Jax secured the opening with a buffalo hide. Alara stared at the now sleeping Iris, who rested peacefully in the fur-lined cradle. "The little sky," she whispered, the scientific skepticism of the East dissolving entirely. She had no explanation, but she had warmth and she was alive. The frontier had taught her that not all truths could be found in a book. They awoke to a world transformed. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind another foot of fresh, dry snow. The sky was a searing, relentless blue, but the temperature was even lower than the previous day, a cold that felt like shattering glass. "We must move quickly," Jax announced, breaking down their shelter. "We can reach the valley by nightfall, but we must be steady." They set off, Jax breaking a fresh trail. The snow was deep, slowing their pace, but the path ahead was clear, until they reached the mouth of a narrow, high-walled canyon. The canyon was the most direct route to the valley, but the storm's heavy weight had taken its toll. Before them lay a formidable obstacle, a massive avalanche of old, packed snow, ice, and fallen rock had slid down the canyon wall, completely blocking the trail. Going back was unthinkable, and going around meant traversing difficult, deep ravines that would add half a day to the journey. Jack surveyed the sheer, icy rock face to their right, the canyon wall itself. It was a terrifying, almost vertical ascent. "There is an old way," he said, his voice grim, his breath pluming thick and white. "A climb, steep and unforgiving. It is faster, but I cannot pull the travois and secure the path simultaneously. The moment of the high climax arrived, stark and terrifying. This was the true test, the moment where survival relied entirely on the absolute blind surrender of one soul to another. Jax Rourke turned to Alara. I must go alone, Alara Vance. I will climb up, find the purchase, and secure the rope at the top. You must wait here, alone, under this rock shelf, and guard the children. I will return for you. The cabin, the fever, the lonely burial, all the accumulated terror of the past weeks coalesced into one paralyzing thought. He will leave us. He was not bound by her world's laws or vows. He was Comanche. He could climb, find his people, and leave the white woman and her infants to the mercy of the mountains. Every story she had ever heard about the savages screamed at her to refuse. Alara's fingers tightened on the rifle. How do I know, she rasped, her voice a thin, ragged sound, that you will return? You have no reason, no vow to return to me. Jax's gaze was steady, meeting her doubt head-on. You do not. You have my word as Jax Rourke, son of Willowsong. But my word means nothing to your fear. You must decide if your fear of me is greater than your children's chance to live. It was a cold, pure challenge of faith, a spiritual test dressed in the unforgiving uniform of the wilderness. She looked at the rock face, then at her children bundled tightly. She thought of the vow of wood, the tiny charm around her neck, a piece of music turned into an amulet of survival. Just then, as she wavered on the brink of panic, little Iris, little Sky, stirred. The infant's eyes opened, and she looked up, not at Alara, but over her shoulder, directly up the icy, brutal cliff face. Then Iris smiled, a wide, serene, utterly unconcerned smile, as if she were greeting a friend. That simple, unearthly gesture shattered Alara's fear. She remembered Jax's words. The little Sky sees the shape of the land. She remembered how Iris had guided them to the cave. This time Iris was telling her, he is safe. Trust him. Alara lowered the rifle, her eyes fixed on Jax. She reached up, tore the vow of wood, the relic of her lost world, from her neck, and pressed the small carved piece of cherry wood into Jax's palm. Go, she said, her voice shaking but firm with the authority of a terrible choice. Take the vow. Let this wood, the memory of my dead husband, be the only thing that ensures you return. The exchange was the final, absolute surrender of her autonomy and her fear. It was a vow of trust, sealed not by a handshake, but by a relic of her lost world given to a man of the new one. Jax looked at the charm, his face inscrutable. He closed his hand over the delicate piece of cherry wood. I accept this vow, Alara Vance. He secured his pack, clipped his climbing axe, and began the ascent. Alara watched, weapon lowered but not put away, for an agonizing hour. Her soul was raw. Just as the sun began its brutal dip, Jax appeared at the top, a silhouette against the blinding sky. He secured the rope, rappelled down, his face slick with sweat and ice. He walked directly to Alara, opened his hand, and placed the wooden charm back in her palm. The way is clear, he said simply. The vow is kept. They secured the travois to the rope, and Jax helped Alara climb the terrifying slope. The passage took another hour, but once atop the ridge, they moved quickly. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple that promised another night of bone-deep cold. They reached the crest of the final ridge as darkness fell completely. Jax paused, gesturing ahead. Below them, nestled in a sheltered caldera valley, lay the Comanche winter camp, a rough circle of 24 sturdy tipis, smoke rising in lazy plumes, and the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat carried on the crisp air. Natural steam from hidden hot springs softened the landscape, creating patches of bare, dark earth amidst the overwhelming snow. My people, Jax murmured, we are safe now. As they began their descent, figures emerged from the camp. A group of riders approached quickly, 4 men on horseback, their faces stern and watchful. They stopped a short distance away, exchanging words with Jax in the rapid, guttural flow of the Comanche tongue. Their gazes moved from Jax to Alara, then lingered on the travois with its precious small cargo. After what seemed like an eternity of scrutiny, one of the men, older than the others with streaks of gray in his long hair, rode closer. He was the most commanding figure Alara had ever seen. He spoke again to Jax, who answered at length, occasionally gesturing toward Alara and the travois. Finally, the older man turned to Alara and spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Chief Iron Hand. Jax Rourke tells me you have lost your husband and faced death in the storm. He was right to bring you here." Alara inclined her head respectfully, clutching the vow of wood beneath her collar. "Thank you for allowing us to come. My children and I would not have survived without Jax's help." The chief studied her face for a long, silent moment before nodding slowly. "The Comanche do not turn away life, Alara Vance, especially life that has fought the storm." He gestured to the other riders. "We will escort you to camp. Jax's mother awaits you." The final stretch into the camp passed in a blur for Alara. Curious faces appeared at teepee entrances. Children ran alongside them, pointing. She kept her eyes focused ahead, intensely conscious of being an outsider, but determined to project dignity rather than fear. They were led to a large teepee near the center of the camp. Standing outside was an older woman with a deeply lined face and keen, perceptive eyes that immediately reminded Alara of Jax. Her gray hair was braided, and she wore a soft leather dress adorned with intricate beadwork. "My mother, Stone Hearth," Jax introduced as they stopped before her. Stone Hearth's gaze moved directly to the travois. Without a word, she stepped forward and carefully parted the furs to reveal the twins. Her weathered face softened completely as she looked at them, and she murmured something that made Jax smile. "She says they have strong lungs," Jax translated, "and they will live. She welcomes them, and you." Stone Hearth looked up at Alara, her dark eyes assessing but not unkind. She spoke again. "She says you must be very tired," Jax translated. "Come inside where it is warm. There is food and a place for you to rest." As Alara followed Stone Hearth into the teepee, carrying Emily while Jax brought Leo, she felt a curious sense of crossing a threshold. Behind her lay the life she had planned with Silas, a life now impossible. Ahead lay an unknown path, beginning with these people who had offered shelter when she had nowhere else to turn. Inside the teepee, a fire burned in a central pit, smoke rising cleanly to escape through the opening at the peak. Furs and woven mats covered the ground, creating a surprisingly comfortable space. Stone Hearth gestured to a prepared area with extra furs and blankets. "This will be your place," Jax explained. "I will stay with my cousin's family while you are here. My mother will tend to you." Alara gently laid Leo and Iris down on the furs. The twins, exhausted from the journey, fell asleep almost immediately. Stone Hearth handed Alara a wooden bowl filled with a rich stew of meat and wild roots. The aroma made Alara's stomach rumble. She ate ravenously. As she ate, Stone Hearth knelt by the twins, examining them carefully. Her hands were gentle, wise, and practiced. She reached into a small leather pouch and began preparing a mixture of dried herbs in a clay pot near the fire. "Medicine for babies," Stone Hearth explained in halting English, noticing Alara's questioning look, "to keep them strong against the cold." Then Stone Hearth's gaze settled on Iris. She lifted the sleeping baby and turned her gently toward the light of the fire, running a strong, knowing finger over the child's forehead and eyelids. She paused, her eyes widening slightly, and she spoke quickly to Jax in Comanche. Jax listened, his expression growing serious, then turned to Alara. "My mother says she sees it clearly. The gift we spoke of on the trail." "The gift?" Alara asked, her heart racing. "The sight," Jax confirmed. "The power of the little sky." Stone Hearth nodded firmly, addressing Alara directly in English this time. Her words slow and deliberate. "The small one, Iris, she did not just see the cave, she saw the change. She feels the earth's breath, the coming and going of the air. This ability is rare. It is a powerful spirit." Alara felt a shock of awe and disbelief. Little sky. She remembered the moment on the trail, the small hand pointing into the blizzard. She saved us," Alara murmured. "She saved you, yes," Stone Hearth confirmed. "But more than that, she was guided here by her spirit. She belongs to the air and the land. She is a person of value. The statement was profound. Ilara and her children were not just refugees accepted out of charity, they were people of destiny, welcomed for the spiritual significance of the infant girl. This was an acceptance that went far deeper than a temporary humanitarian gesture. Later that evening, as the sounds of the camp grew quieter, Jax returned to escort Ilara to the council. An honor, he explained, to tell her story to the elders. Ilara changed into the clothing Stonehearth had provided, a simple dress made of soft, tan buckskin and fur-lined moccasins. She was no longer dressed as a defeated pioneer, but as a guest respected by the tribe. She stood before the council of Chief Iron Hand and the elders. She spoke truthfully, without fear, about her journey with Silas, his death, her struggle in the cabin, and the desperate vow of wood she had sealed with Jax Rourke. She spoke of her gratitude and her fear, and finally of the powerful, inexplicable moment when Iris had guided them from the storm. When she finished, Chief Iron Hand nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping over the council. Ilara Vance has spoken truth. She has walked a hard path, and she has proven her strength with a mother's fierce will. Her story is one of great sacrifice and trust. He looked directly at Ilara. We honor the vow made with Jax Rourke. You and your children are welcome here for as long as the snow holds. You have traded one world for another, and this world will protect you. Ilara returned to the teepee and checked on her sleeping twins. She settled beside them, pulling a soft buffalo hide over herself. Around her neck, the vow of wood, the carved piece of Silas's beloved violin, was a small, warm presence against her skin. She had traveled far from everything familiar, yet somehow she had found herself exactly where she and her children needed to be. The little sky had led them, and the fierce, protective embrace of the wilderness had accepted them. The journey for survival was over. The journey of their new destiny had just begun.